Greetings, dear subscribers and casual listeners of my channel. The world of Harry Potter has always amazed us with wonders, but Rowling's true magic lay in her ability to shock readers with unexpected plot twists. She masterfully hid clues, made us suspect the wrong characters, and in the finale stunned us with revelations that took our breath away. Let's revisit the most striking twists that turned this story into a legend. Enjoy the video. Number 1. Harry is a Horcrux. From the very beginning, there was something unsettling. Harry's scar burned when he met Voldemort, his dreams were too vivid, and his ability to speak Parseltongue frightened even wizards. Only in the 7th book was the terrifying truth revealed. Harry himself was a Horcrux. This revelation shocked not only the readers but also Harry himself. To defeat the Dark Lord, Harry had to sacrifice himself. His walk into the Forbidden Forest was the moment when a boy finally became a hero, ready to face death for the sake of others. This was not just a twist, but the very heart of the story. Number 2. Snape's true loyalty. No character caused as much debate as Severus Snape. A Slytherin student, Harry's tormentor, Dumbledore's killer, everything seemed to point to his dark side. But the final chapters revealed a completely different picture. Snape had loved Lily Evans, Harry's mother, all his life. For her memory, he took on endless risk, helping Dumbledore and protecting the boy. This twist completely transformed how we saw him. From a cold traitor, he became a tragic knight whose life was sacrificed in the name of love. Number 3. Scabbers. Peter Pettigrew, serious, innocent. For years, Ron's rat seemed nothing more than a funny pet. But in The Prisoner of Azkaban, Rowling pulled off a perfect trick. Scabbers was not a pet at all, but an animagus, Peter Pettigrew. This revelation struck a double blow. The true traitor of Harry's parents had been right there all along, while Sirius Black, James's best friend, had rotted in Azkaban under false charges. In one moment, everything we thought we knew about the past of these characters was shattered. Number 4. Mad-Eye Moody, Barty Crouch Jr. In The Goblet of Fire, the new Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher instantly earned trust. Mad-Eye Moody was strict but fair, a mentor who helped Harry in the Triwizard Tournament. That's why it was so shocking to learn that the man was not Moody at all, but Barty Crouch Jr. in disguise. The Marauders map had shown the name Barty Crouch, but readers never suspected it was the son, not the father. This twist was one of the most unexpected and brilliantly prepared. Number 5. Snape, the Half-Blood Prince. The potions textbook, filled with notes from the Half-Blood Prince, had long been both a help and a danger to Harry. It saved him in class, but also taught him the spell Sectum Sempra, which nearly killed Malfoy. Then came the shocker. Snape declared, "I am the Half-Blood Prince." The man Harry hated had been his unseen mentor all along. Combined with Dumbledore's death, this revelation was a devastating emotional turning point in the series. Number 6. Regulus Black. Sirius's brother had never seemed important. A Death Eater who vanished mysteriously, his story looked finished. But when it was revealed that Regulus had tried to steal a Horcrux, fans gasped. This quiet act of courage turned a background figure into a hero. Regulus showed that even in darkness, sparks of resistance could shine. Number 7. Professor Quirrell. The first book might seem the simplest, yet it delivered the first major twist. Harry suspected Snape all along, while Quirrell appeared nothing more than a timid coward. That's why the climax stunned us. Quirrell turned out to be not only the villain, but also Voldemort's host. The scene at the Mirror of Erased was a brilliant demonstration of how easily Rowling manipulated the reader's focus. Number 8. The return of Remus and Tonks in the forest. When Harry turned the resurrection stone in his hand, the dead returned to walk beside him. James and Lily appeared first, then Sirius, and finally Remus, freshly fallen in the battle. They were not ghosts, but shadows of love, summoned to guide him in his last steps. "We are part of you," Sirius told him. Remus added softly, "You'll stay with me?" And Harry answered, "Until the very end." In that moment, loss turned into strength. The boy who had always felt alone was no longer walking to death by himself. The presence of Remus and Tonks carried particular weight. Only pages before, Harry had learned that their newborn son, Teddy, had been left an orphan, just as he once was. Yet Remus stood tall and calm, proud of Harry's choice. His return reminded Harry that sacrifice was not an end, but a bond between the living and the dead. The twist was not about defeating Voldemort with power, but about courage born from love. It proved that even death could not break the ties that truly mattered. Number 9. Dumbledore and his secrets. For years, Harry believed Albus Dumbledore was flawless, a mentor who always knew the right path. That image shattered in Deathly Hallows. Through Rita Skeeter's biography and Aberforth's bitter words, Harry learned of Ariana, the sister whose uncontrolled magic ended in tragedy, and of the violent duel that killed her. Aberforth told him he was brilliant, but he was selfish. He knew it. He admitted it. Suddenly, Dumbledore's greatness was shadowed by guilt and regret. The revelation of his friendship with Gellert Grindelwald added another twist. Harry discovered that Dumbledore, the future champion of Muggle rights, had once dreamed with Grindelwald of wizarding domination. "For the greater good" was their slogan. Words later carved into Grindelwald's prison. The wise old headmaster had once been seduced by the very ideas he spent a lifetime fighting. Readers saw that even Dumbledore's wisdom was forged through dangerous mistakes. These secrets changed the story's balance. Harry realized his guide had been human all along, fallible, conflicted, capable of error. Yet in that humanity lay the deeper lesson. Dumbledore's greatness came not from perfection, but from rising above his failures. The twist did not diminish him. It made his legacy more real. For Harry and the readers alike, it was a moment of painful truth and unexpected clarity. Number 10. Voldemort and Ollivander. Garrick Ollivander was first introduced as the eccentric wand-maker in Diagon Alley, measuring Harry's arms and murmuring about wand cores. For years he seemed like a background figure, but in Deathly Hallows his capture by Voldemort revealed his true importance. "The wand chooses the wizard," he had once said, but Voldemort forced him to explain more. The Dark Lord needed to understand why the Elder Wand would not obey him, and only Ollivander held the answers. When Harry rescued Ollivander from Malfoy Manor, the old man spoke of wand law with unsettling precision. He explained how Harry's wand had acted on its own against Voldemort and why allegiance mattered more than raw power. "The wand learns loyalty," Ollivander whispered, his pale eyes wide with fear. These words were more than theory. They foreshadowed the final duel. Without his knowledge, Harry would never have understood why the Elder Wand refused Voldemort in the end. The twist lay in the revelation that a man once thought harmless had been holding a key to Voldemort's downfall. Ollivander's quiet wisdom, hidden behind his shop counter for decades, became the thread that unraveled the Dark Lord's confidence. He was not a fighter nor a member of the Order, yet his words shaped the climax of the war. In a story filled with warriors and martyrs, the Wandmaker emerged as an unlikely keeper of destiny. Number 11. Neville, the hero of Hogwarts. Neville Longbottom began his journey as the boy who lost his toad and stumbled over spells. Even Professor Snape mocked him in class, calling him an idiot boy. He seemed destined to stay in the shadow of Harry, Ron, and Hermione. Yet the seeds of courage were always there. The Sorting Hat itself once told Neville he had a lot of courage, though the boy doubted it. His growth was slow, almost hidden, but by the end it became impossible to ignore. In Deathly Hallows, Neville stepped into the light. When Voldemort summoned the defenders of Hogwarts to surrender, it was Neville who defied him. "I'll join you when hell freezes over," he shouted, facing certain death. Voldemort responded by placing the Sorting Hat on his head and setting it ablaze, a public humiliation meant to crush him. But the very same moment became Neville's transformation. From the flames, he pulled the Sword of Gryffindor, a weapon that appears only to those who truly embody bravery. With the sword in hand, Neville struck the final blow to Nagini, Voldemort's last Horcrux. The snake's body thudded to the ground, rolling right, and in that instant the Dark Lord was left mortal again. It was not Harry, nor Dumbledore, nor even another legendary wizard. It was Neville, the boy once considered hopeless, who turned the tide of the war. That single stroke gave Harry the chance to finish Voldemort. Neville's act was more than a victory in battle. It was the fulfillment of his entire character arc. From shy, trembling student to the leader of Dumbledore's army, he became proof that heroism is not about perfection, but about standing up when it matters most. His courage showed that even the quietest, most overlooked person can change the course of history. Number 12. Harry's final sacrifice and his return. Harry's final walk into the Forbidden Forest was quiet and heavy. He knew the truth after seeing Snape's memories. He was the last Horcrux. To end Voldemort, he had to die. With the resurrection stone in hand, he whispered, "Stay with me," as James, Lily, Sirius, and Remus appeared beside him. Their voices gave him courage, and step by step he moved closer to the enemy's camp. There was no fight, no resistance. He simply faced Voldemort and let the green flash of Avada Kedavra strike him down. The shock was total. For years readers had followed Harry's battles, expecting one last duel. Instead, Rowling gave us sacrifice. Harry lay still, and for a moment the story seemed over. Voldemort even believed it. "Harry Potter is dead!" he shouted to the survivors of Hogwarts. The cruelty of that moment made it unforgettable. The boy who lived had become the boy who chose to die. But then came the twist. Harry opened his eyes in a strange white place. He spoke with Dumbledore, who explained why he still lived. "He took your blood into his body," Dumbledore said of Voldemort. "Your mother's protection inside you both." Death had touched Harry but could not hold him because love was stronger than dark magic. The choice was his, to rest or to return. And Harry chose to go back. Because the battle was not finished, when he rose once more in the forest hidden beneath his cloak, Harry carried more than survival. His sacrifice had shielded the fighters of Hogwarts. Just as Lily's love had saved him as a baby, Harry's love now protected everyone else. The spell that Voldemort cast no longer bound them. In that moment, tragedy turned into hope. The boy who had walked willingly to death came back not only to live, but to end the Dark Lord's reign forever. Number 13. The story of Tom Riddle. Tom Riddle first appeared as nothing more than an echo in a diary. Harry met him in the Chamber of Secrets, a charming boy with dark eyes and perfect manners. "Voldemort is my past, present, and future," Riddle finally confessed, the letters of his name rearranging into the truth. The handsome prefect from 50 years ago was the monster who had murdered Harry's parents. What looked like a school memory had been a trap laid by a boy already lost to ambition. Dumbledore's memories in the Pensieve showed how early that ambition took root. In Half-Blood Prince, we see Tom as an orphan at Wool's orphanage, collecting trophies from other children and hurting those who crossed him. "I can make bad things happen to people who annoy me," he told Dumbledore without shame. The warning was there even in his childhood, a gifted boy but twisted by isolation and hunger for control. At Hogwarts, Tom built his mask of charm. Teachers praised him, students admired him, but under the surface he was already splitting his soul. The diary, the ring, the locket, each Horcrux, was born from an act of murder. When Slughorn nervously explained what it meant to divide one's soul, Tom leaned in, eyes gleaming. "Wouldn't it be better, make you stronger, to have your soul in more pieces?" The boy who asked that question was not a student anymore. He was a shadow of the Dark Lord. The twist of Tom Riddle's story is not just his transformation, but how carefully it was hidden. The charming boy became Voldemort in plain sight, step by step, until no innocence was left. The handsome prefect turned into a snake-faced tyrant. His tale was a warning. Even the brightest talent can rot when love is absent and ambition rules. Readers saw not only a villain's birth, but the tragedy of a boy who never chose another path. Number 14. The Deathly Hallows are real. The tale of the three brothers seemed at first like nothing more than a bedtime story. Hermione read it aloud from the tales of Beedle the Bard, and Ron even chuckled at the idea of Death handing out gifts. But Rowling turned that small interlude into a shocking revelation. The Deathly Hallows were real. What looked like a fairy tale was in fact a hidden map to some of the most powerful magical objects ever created. Suddenly a children's storybook carried the weight of prophecy. The invisibility cloak was the first clue. Harry had used it for years, never realizing its true origin. It wasn't just an ordinary magical garment worn thin by time. It was the very cloak given to Ignotus Peverell by Death himself. Dumbledore explained, "It is a cloak that really and truly renders the wearer completely invisible and endures eternally, giving constant and impenetrable concealment no matter how many spells are cast at it." That single detail shifted everything. The heirloom Harry thought came from James turned out to be a relic older than Hogwarts itself. The other Hallows deepened the mystery. The Elder Wand, stolen and won in duels, left a trail of blood across centuries. Voldemort's desperate search for it showed just how much he craved ultimate power. Then there was the Resurrection Stone, hidden inside the gaunt ring, which Dumbledore once tried to use. He admitted, "I was a fool, I was such a fool," after its curse nearly killed him. These weren't legends anymore. They were forces shaping the lives and deaths of the most important figures in Harry's world. The brilliance of this twist lies in how myth bled into reality. What began as Hermione's reading transformed into a race for survival. Harry held the true cloak. Voldemort hunted the Elder Wand. Dumbledore had fallen because of the stone. All three gifts of death circled the final battle, deciding who would live and who would fall. A fairy tale, dismissed as make-believe, became the spine of the war. It reminded us that in Rowling's world, stories whispered to children could contain the most dangerous truths. Number 15. The cowardly hero of Slytherin, Horace Slughorn. Horace Slughorn entered the story as a figure wrapped in silk comfort and cowardly caution. He was not a man of battle, nor a figure of fiery speeches. He surrounded himself with talented students, only when it benefited him, collected their successes like trophies, and slipped quietly away from danger whenever the storm rose too high. Readers met him hiding in a muggle house, disguised as an armchair, fearing discovery by Death Eaters or by Dumbledore himself. It was hardly the entrance of a hero. For most of the narrative, Slughorn embodied the very stereotype that Slytherin House had carried: cunning, opportunistic, self-preserving. He was the image of a man who would rather pour another glass of crystallized pineapple wine than raise his wand in a duel. And yet, when the last battle came, something unexpected broke through that veil of fear. The Battle of Hogwarts was not a moment one could avoid. It demanded choices, and those choices defined more than just individual courage. They defined the legacy of each Hogwarts house. Slughorn, who had always spoken with slippery words and avoided confrontation, was suddenly placed in a position where hiding was no longer possible. He had to choose to run again and preserve his skin, or to finally align himself with those who had never feared to stand openly against the darkness. In that decision, the story turned a corner. For a character associated with cowardice, Slughorn's choice to return to the castle and fight was a subtle but powerful twist. It reminded the reader that courage is not always born of reckless bravery, but sometimes out of fear, faced head-on. The brilliance of this turn lies in how Rowling framed it. For chapters and even books, Slughorn is a man who represents weakness in the face of danger. He refuses to provide Dumbledore with the full truth about Tom Riddle and the Horcruxes till pressed with Harry's desperate insistence. He is the man who says, "I am not proud. I am ashamed of what I know," when revealing the memory Harry needs. Shame and fear followed him, even in old age. And yet on that fateful night, shame transformed into action. By donning his emerald green pajamas and returning to the fight, he carried the weight of his past mistakes and sought redemption in the only way left, by standing where others would see him not as a collector of talent, but as a protector of the castle. The moment Slughorn reappeared in the thick of the battle has often been overshadowed by more dramatic duels, Molly Weasley facing Bellatrix, Harry confronting Voldemort. But for those who pay attention, it is one of the most important moments in the portrayal of Slytherin House. Rowling writes, Slughorn intended to fight, his enormous belly shivering with courage he did not often display. The line itself carried a sense of irony, but also admiration. This was not a young, hot-blooded Gryffindor charging into the fray. It was an old man who had spent a lifetime avoiding risk, now stepping willingly into danger. And with him came reinforcements that no one expected. Slughorn did not arrive alone. He brought other Slytherins and reinforcements from Hogsmeade, breaking the long-standing perception that Slytherins abandoned the castle in its darkest hour. For much of the story, the House of Salazar was painted with the strokes of betrayal. Draco Malfoy leading Death Eaters into Hogwarts, Pansy Parkinson offering Harry up to Voldemort, and the long shadow of Voldemort himself. Gryffindors stood as martyrs, Hufflepuffs as loyal friends, Ravenclaws as clever defenders. But Slytherin was the house of suspicion. Slughorn's return was a reminder that a single act can reshape a narrative centuries in the making. One cannot overlook the symbolic weight of the duel he participated in. When Voldemort unleashed his fury in the Great Hall, he found himself opposed not only by Harry, but by a united force of professors. McGonagall, Flitwick and Slughorn stood together, combining their magic to hold back the most feared wizard of their age. It was a trio that represented the best of Hogwarts, wisdom, discipline and cunning. For a fleeting but powerful moment, Slughorn was no longer the man hiding behind velvet curtains. He was shoulder to shoulder with colleagues who had never doubted their duty. This alignment of houses in unity struck at the very heart of Voldemort's philosophy, which thrived on division. The courage Slughorn displayed did not erase his flaws. He was still the man who once favoured Tom Riddle, giving him attention that might have strengthened his rise. He was still the man who enjoyed flattery and connections more than teaching for its own sake. Yet the beauty of this twist lies in the complexity. Courage is not the absence of fear or selfishness. It is the decision, in one moment, to put those aside for something greater. Slughorn didn't fight because he suddenly became a Gryffindor. He fought because even in his fear, he recognized that Hogwarts was worth defending, that perhaps his entire life of avoidance had led to this one necessary stand. This moment also offered readers a reframing of Slytherin as a house. For so long, the narrative had encouraged suspicion toward Green and Silver. The Sorting Hat's warnings, the dark history of Voldemort, the sneers of Malfoy, all these fed into the stereotype that Slytherin equaled villainy. But here was a professor of that house, an embodiment of its values of resourcefulness and survival, who in the end chose to use those traits in defense rather than betrayal. It was Rowling's subtle reminder that houses are not destiny. The qualities that define Slytherin, ambition, cunning, and self-preservation, can also be turned into determination, strategic defense, and the will to endure when others fall. Number 16. Grindelwald's refusal to betray. Of all the characters who walked the darker paths of the wizarding world, few carried the same aura of menace and fascination as Gellert Grindelwald. He was described as a figure of unmatched brilliance and ambition, a man who once believed himself destined to remake the world according to his vision of wizarding dominance. Albus Dumbledore himself admitted in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows that Grindelwald was the most brilliant student that ever walked the halls of Durmstrang. For decades, Grindelwald had been remembered as the spectre of terror from a previous age, the shadow that loomed over Europe before Lord Voldemort rose to power. Yet when Voldemort sought him out in Nurmengard prison, readers were startled by a choice that turned everything on its head. Grindelwald, beaten and imprisoned, refused to betray the Elder Wand's secret. It was a moment that challenged assumptions, forcing the reader to reconsider what it meant to be a villain in Rowling's world. The power of this narrative twist lay not only in what Grindelwald said, but in what it revealed about Voldemort's tyranny. Voldemort had come to him expecting fear, submission, and desperation. Instead, he was met with defiance. In the Deathly Hallows, Rowling writes, "He laughed at the sight of Voldemort, laughed in the face of the most feared wizard in the world." It was an extraordinary image, a broken prisoner robbed of his empire, staring down the embodiment of darkness without a flicker of obedience. Grindelwald, who once terrorized nations, seemed almost heroic for a single breath of time, choosing resistance where so many others had knelt. This reversal of roles startled the audience and underscored the theme that even figures cast in shadow could find within themselves the spark of rebellion against something greater and more destructive. What made this twist so striking was the way it clashed with the legacy of Grindelwald's own crimes. He was not a misunderstood visionary alone. He was a man who led massacres, imprisoned those who stood in his way, and built the fortress of Nurmengard as a place of torment. Aberforth Dumbledore remembered bitterly how Grindelwald's presence in his brother's life had led to their sister Ariana's death. For all these reasons, no reader expected him to possess even the slightest shred of decency. That he should deny Voldemort, the Dark Lord who sought to finish what Grindelwald had begun, added complexity to his character. It hinted that while Voldemort stood for annihilation without limits, Grindelwald had at least once believed in a purpose, however twisted, and that some echo of that belief remained within him, even when he himself was defeated. Rowling crafted this scene to echo the layered morality of her series. Harry's journey was never about confronting flat caricatures of evil, but about understanding choice and the consequences it brings. The refusal of Grindelwald exemplified this. For a man who had been stripped of everything, who could have sought revenge by offering Voldemort a weapon of immense power. The decision not to speak showed that even darkness can recognize a boundary. The book gives us his words, "Kill me then, Voldemort, I welcome death, but my death will not bring you what you seek. There is so much you do not understand." These lines are seared into the narrative as a sharp contrast to the silence of those who submitted out of terror. Grindelwald chose defiance, knowing he would die for it, and in doing so his character became more nuanced than many readers had ever imagined. The refusal also highlighted Voldemort's blindness. Voldemort believed that fear and cruelty were universal levers that every soul could be bent under the weight of his threats. Grindelwald's defiance proved otherwise. By standing firm, he revealed to readers that Voldemort was not invincible, that there existed wills too strong or too damaged to break. This foreshadowed Harry's own resilience, the courage to resist Voldemort even when he seemed to hold all the power. Rowling carefully paralleled these moments, reminding her audience that Voldemort's failure was not only in being defeated physically, but in misunderstanding the deeper essence of human will. At the same time, Grindelwald's stand cannot be viewed as redemption. He did not become a hero. His crimes remained vast, his cruelty undeniable. Rather, this was a reminder that even monsters can act in ways that complicate their legacy. It echoed Dumbledore's words earlier in the series. "It is our choices, Harry, that show what we truly are, far more than our abilities." Grindelwald's choice, though made at the end of his life, revealed something different about him. Perhaps pride, perhaps disdain for Voldemort, perhaps a final spark of conviction in his own ideals. Whatever the motive, it humanized him. Without excusing him, turning him from a one-dimensional tyrant into a man capable of making a final, startling choice. This moment also resonated because of Grindelwald's connection to Dumbledore. The two had once been inseparable, their youthful dreams of the greater good leading them down perilous roads. To see Grindelwald alone in his fortress, resisting Voldemort, could be read as a faint echo of Dumbledore's own resistance against tyranny. Though he had long since betrayed Dumbledore's ideals, perhaps something of that old bond remained. The text does not state this outright, but the symbolism lingers. Nurmengard, once built to house his enemies, became Grindelwald's own prison, and within those walls he chose to deny Voldemort, the very man who represented the final. Corruption of all youthful dreams of order and power. Number 17. Draco Malfoy's Wand and the Elder Wand. Draco Malfoy's wand, the simple hawthorn instrument with a unicorn hair core, at first seemed like nothing more than a tool belonging to one of Harry Potter's most persistent rivals. Yet by the end of the saga, this wand became the pivot on which the destiny of the entire wizarding world turned. It was not the Elder Wand itself, nor the firebolt Harry once prized, nor even the Holly and Phoenix feather wand Harry carried for most of his life. Instead, it was Draco's wand, seized in a moment of desperation, that set in motion the chain of wand allegiances leading to the downfall of Lord Voldemort. The irony was almost poetic, the boy who once mocked Harry at every turn. Unknowingly became the unwitting accomplice in Harry's greatest victory. The moment of this decisive shift occurred at Malfoy Manor, when Harry and his friends were captured and brought before the Malfoy family. In the chaos of their attempted escape, Harry wrested Draco's wand from his hand. Rowling describes it simply, but with enormous narrative weight. Harry took Draco's wand and felt a sudden thrill of power that was not entirely his own. That act of disarming, ordinary at first glance, was in fact extraordinary. For in the laws of wand lore, mastery passes not through possession, but through conquest, and Draco Malfoy, though unaware of the magnitude of what had just happened, was the true master of the Elder Wand at that time. By taking Draco's wand, Harry claimed more than he could possibly have imagined. This twist worked so well precisely because Draco had been carefully constructed throughout the series as a character living in the shadow of others. He was the son of Lucius Malfoy, a Death Eater, raised in privilege, arrogance, and the expectation of cruelty. His role had always seemed to be that of the petty antagonist, the spoiled bully, the voice of sneering prejudice at Hogwarts. Yet in Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, Rowling began to reveal his vulnerability, his unwillingness to fully embrace the murderous destiny Voldemort had set before him. "He's just a boy," Dumbledore said softly to Draco in the tower, moments before Snape delivered the fatal curse. That line foreshadowed that Draco, despite all appearances, was not fated to be the villain Harry had always assumed. The narrative brilliance lies in how Rowling used Draco's reluctance and passivity as a strength in the finale. By not killing Dumbledore, Draco left an opening for Snape to act. By being disarmed by Harry at the Malfoy estate, he passed along a mastery he never truly understood. And by never recognizing his own centrality to the Elder Wand's chain of allegiance, he allowed Harry to step into a role that seemed impossible to explain otherwise. Draco was not heroic, not brave in the Gryffindor sense, yet his small actions shaped the very structure of the climactic confrontation at Hogwarts. The Elder Wand had a lineage of power stretching back centuries. In Deathly Hallows, Ollivander explained to Harry the intricate, almost mystical rules of wand law. The wand chooses the wizard, but the allegiance of a wand can be won if it is taken from its master. Dumbledore had won the Elder Wand from Grindelwald. Draco, in disarming Dumbledore atop the Astronomy Tower, unknowingly became its new master. This revelation redefined Draco's significance in the narrative. The boy who had once only seemed to represent cowardice and cruelty was now, through chance and circumstance, the hinge upon which the fate of Voldemort rested. Harry's victory at the Battle of Hogwarts cannot be separated from this chain. Voldemort, believing he had conquered the Elder Wand by stealing it from Dumbledore's tomb, wielded it with arrogance. Yet the wand did not belong to him, and it resisted him at the critical moment. When Harry revealed the truth, "I am the true master of the Elder Wand," the pieces finally clicked into place. The irony was devastating. Voldemort, obsessed with dominance and fearful of loyalty, was undone by the loyalty of wood and core, by rules of magic older than himself. And at the root of it all stood Draco Malfoy, the reluctant boy whose wand Harry had claimed. What makes this narrative twist particularly powerful is how understated it was. Readers were not guided to suspect Draco's importance during the reading of the final book. In fact, Harry's seizing of Draco's wand felt like a practical necessity in a desperate situation, not the turning point of the series. Only later, as Harry unraveled the Elder Wand's history and mastery, did the truth emerge. This delayed revelation rewarded attentive readers while simultaneously casting the arrogant Malfoy heir in a new, tragic, and ironic light. The contrast between Lucius Malfoy's devotion to Voldemort and Draco's unwilling role in his downfall adds another layer of complexity. Lucius spent the series striving for Voldemort's favor, sacrificing his pride, his position, and even his family's safety to serve the Dark Lord. Yet it was his son, in a moment of fear and hesitation, who unwittingly destroyed Voldemort's claim to the most powerful wand in existence. In this sense, Draco's reluctant participation symbolized the generational collapse of Voldemort's ideology. The children of Death Eaters would not sustain their parents' devotion, and even their mistakes would undo him. Rowling reinforces this theme through the depiction of Draco during the Battle of Hogwarts. He is hesitant, conflicted, even attempting to pull away from Voldemort's forces. In the Room of Requirement, when Harry saves Draco's life from the fiend fire conjured by Crabbe, it underscores that Harry and Draco's destinies are intertwined not only through rivalry, but through mutual survival. The boy who once mocked Harry for his scar, his poverty, and his friends was spared by Harry, and through his earlier defeat had already given Harry the key to victory, number 18, Snape and the Killing Curse. Under the darkened sky of the Astronomy Tower, when Severus Snape raised his wand and spoke the words no one thought he would dare utter, the story of Harry Potter changed forever. The incantation, Avada Kedavra, burned through the night as Albus Dumbledore, weakened and pleading silently, was cast into the void. In that moment, readers across the world recoiled, believing they had just witnessed the most profound act of betrayal. Snape, long distrusted and half believed to be a villain, had seemingly confirmed every suspicion, his black robes sweeping behind him as he vanished into the darkness with the Death Eaters. He became, in the eyes of millions, the murderer of the only man who had ever believed in him. It was a scene of horror and grief, but hidden within it was the seed of one of the greatest reversals in modern storytelling. The brilliance of this twist lay not in the shock alone, but in the transformation it set in motion. J.K. Rowling had spent 6 books carefully constructing layers of ambiguity around Snape's character. He was harsh, cruel in his words, and often vindictive, especially toward Harry. His favoritism toward Draco Malfoy and disdain for Gryffindor seemed to paint him in the darkest colors. Yet Dumbledore trusted him without hesitation, a trust Harry and the readers never understood. When the killing curse struck, it appeared as if Dumbledore's faith had been fatally misplaced, but Rowling's true genius was in showing that what seemed like ultimate treachery was, in fact, ultimate loyalty. The final revelation reshaped not only the perception of Snape, but the emotional architecture of the entire saga. Readers who returned to that moment in Half-Blood Prince after completing Deathly Hallows began to see the subtleties. The weakened state of Dumbledore was not simply due to age or battle fatigue. Earlier, the cursed ring of Marvolo Gaunt had left him mortally wounded, a detail only later explained. Snape, in his skill as a potioneer and master of the dark arts, was the one who had slowed the curse, buying Dumbledore precious months. The headmaster, fully aware that his death was inevitable, made the decision that it should come at Snape's hand. He knew Voldemort demanded Draco to complete the task, a mission destined to destroy Draco's soul. By commanding Snape to do the deed instead, Dumbledore turned his own death into a protective shield for a student. This knowledge turned what looked like a scene of cowardice and evil into an act of mercy and sacrifice. One of the most chilling lines in the series comes not from Dumbledore, but from the desperate Draco Malfoy, wand shaking as he tries to obey Voldemort's will. The boy cannot bring himself to cast the spell. It is in this fragile moment that Snape arrives, his face unreadable, and with no hesitation takes Draco's place. "Severus!" Dumbledore whispers, the final plea that readers first misinterpreted as begging for his life. Instead, it was the headmaster reminding Snape of the agreement. The brilliance lies in this double meaning. On first read, it feels like the tragic imploring of a man betrayed. On second, it becomes the heartbreaking confirmation of trust, of a pact honoured even when it demanded the unthinkable. The artistry of this twist depends heavily on Snape's long history of moral contradiction. He was once a Death Eater, deeply embedded in Voldemort's world. His bullying of Harry, Neville, and others gave ample evidence that he was a bitter, angry man. Yet there were always slivers of light. The fact that he had saved Harry during Quidditch in the first book, his warnings about Quirrell, and the constant, unwavering protection he gave, though hidden behind hostility. Readers ignored these moments, blinded by Harry's own hatred of him. By turning Snape into Dumbledore's killer, Rowling capitalized on this bias. Only later, when the truth emerged, did readers have to confront how much they had misjudged him, just as Harry himself had. When Deathly Hallows revealed the truth, the depth of the twist became fully visible. Through the memories poured into the pensieve, Harry saw Snape's anguished devotion to Lily Potter, the woman he had loved since childhood. "After all this time?" Dumbledore asks him in that memory, and Snape's answer always became the single word that redefined his character. The killing curse that struck Dumbledore was not a rejection of goodness, but the last step in a plan designed to protect Harry and the Resistance. The cruelty of Snape's outward demeanour was the mask of a man forced to play a double game, loathed by all sides, living in perpetual isolation. Rowling's choice of the killing curse itself amplified the gravity of the moment. Avada Kedavra is the darkest of all spells, unforgivable and absolute. To wield it was to bind oneself forever to Voldemort's ideology of domination and death. Yet Snape's use of it was the paradox. The spell of ultimate destruction became, in this case, a weapon of salvation. By wielding the curse, Snape maintained his cover within Voldemort's ranks, preserved Draco's innocence, and fulfilled Dumbledore's dying wish. The irony is staggering. What appeared to be the final proof of his corruption became the cornerstone of his redemption. Consider the way Harry's perception of Snape was shattered in those final chapters. For years, Harry had blamed him for James and Lily's deaths, loathing every smirk and insult. Yet, as the truth unfolded, the boy realized that his enemy had been his protector all along. "You have your mother's eyes," Snape said with his last breath. a line that tied every piece together. The very eyes that reminded Snape daily of Lily's loss became the reason he never stopped fighting for Harry's survival. When readers re-examined the tower scene with this knowledge, the curse no longer sounded like an act of cold triumph, but like a dagger Snape plunged into himself. This twist also elevated the theme of sacrifice that runs through the entire series. Lily sacrificed her life for Harry, James faced Voldemort to protect his family, Sirius lived as a fugitive to stand by his godson, and Dumbledore orchestrated his own death to safeguard the future. Snape's role completed this pattern, but with a unique bitterness. He received no glory, no recognition, and no affection in return. His sacrifice was made in silence, burdened with the hatred of those he protected. That perhaps made it the greatest sacrifice of all. Rowling anchored this revelation in meticulous detail, ensuring it felt inevitable rather than forced. From the moment Dumbledore trusted Snape without hesitation, to the conversations Harry overheard, to the quiet tension in their interactions, every clue was there. Readers had doubted Dumbledore's wisdom, and Rowling allowed that doubt to grow into outrage when Snape struck. The genius lay in forcing the audience to mistrust the one character who most deserved sympathy, then making them confront their misjudgment at the very end. The narrative demanded an emotional reckoning. What makes this twist stand out among countless betrayals and reversals in literature is its emotional weight. When the truth emerged, readers did not merely see a plot mechanic fall into place. They felt grief, guilt, and admiration all at once. Snape was no longer the villain of their assumptions. He became a tragic hero, defined not by glory, but by enduring pain. His casting of Avada Kedavra became less the cry of a villain and more the scream of a man bound to destiny, forced to carry out the will of someone he loved and hated in equal measure. One cannot overlook the artistry in Harry's final decision after learning the truth. When he faced Voldemort in the Forbidden Forest, he named his son after Severus Snape, calling him the bravest man I ever knew. That line would not have had the same impact without the reversal of the astronomy tower. The killing curse, once the symbol of betrayal, became the proof of Snape's bravery. Through that twist, Rowling reframed the nature of heroism. It was not only Harry's courage or Dumbledore's wisdom that defeated Voldemort, but also the silent endurance of a man who shouldered unbearable burdens. The tower scene, when revisited, now reads like a tragic play. The stage is set, the audience misled, the actors performing roles scripted in secrecy. Dumbledore, already condemned by the ring, raises no defense. Draco falters, unable to cross the line. And Snape, carrying years of bitterness, resentment, and hidden love, delivers the fatal blow that secures victory for the side of good. It is Shakespearean in its complexity, echoing themes of fate, loyalty, and the double edge of appearances. Ultimately, the use of Avada Kedavra at that moment was the perfect narrative tool. It gave readers the horror they expected from Snape, only to strip that certainty away later, forcing them to reconsider everything. The reversal was not simply about plot mechanics, but about the fragility of judgment, the hidden lives people lead, and the weight of choices unseen. In turning the darkest curse into an act of devotion, Rowling crafted one of the most unforgettable emotional shocks in modern literature. The killing curse struck down Dumbledore, but the true blow landed on the hearts of readers, reshaping their view of Snape and reminding them that sometimes the greatest heroes wear the masks of villains. It was the twist that changed not only the course of the story, but also the way generations of readers understood loyalty, sacrifice, and the haunting complexity of human character. Number 19, Sybil Trelawney and the Prophecy. Of all the characters in the Harry Potter saga, few underwent such a transformation in the eyes of the reader as Sybil Trelawney. At first glance, she seemed nothing more than a parody of a mystical seer hidden away in the dusty tower of Hogwarts, surrounded by crystal balls and the sickly, sweet scent of sherry. Her lessons in divination were mocked by Hermione Granger as a waste of time, and even ridiculed by Harry and Ron. Yet the irony of Trelawney's existence lies in the fact that her greatest contribution to the wizarding world was not in the classroom but in a moment of true sight that changed everything. The prophecy she uttered in the Hog's Head Inn would become the single most important thread in the tapestry of the story, quietly guiding Voldemort's hand and shaping Harry's destiny. What makes this twist so compelling is the contrast between her everyday persona and the magnitude of her hidden role. Throughout the book, Sybil appears almost comical, her enormous glasses magnifying her eyes to absurd proportions, her trembling voice predicting doom at every corner, and her flair for melodrama that left her students exchanging smirks behind her back. To most characters, she was a fraud. When she predicted Harry's early death during his 3rd year, the students rolled their eyes. Even Dumbledore admitted that he hired her mostly to keep the prophecy safe rather than because of her. Teaching skills. This portrayal lulled the reader into a sense of dismissal. And then suddenly, Rowling reveals that this eccentric professor was the vessel through which fate itself spoke. The first prophecy was made almost by accident. In Order of the Phoenix, Dumbledore recounts how he went to meet Trelawney in the shabby upstairs room of the Hog's Head, planning to assess her for the divination post. During the interview, she seemed unimpressive, nervous, and faintly ridiculous. Yet, in the middle of the conversation, her voice transformed. Rowling writes, her head fell forward onto her chest. She spoke in the harsh, hoarse tones Harry had heard her use once before. What followed was the chilling prophecy. The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches, born to. Those who have thrice defied him, born as the 7th month, dies. In that instant, the reader realizes that Sybil is not merely a fraud hiding behind shawls and incense. She is capable, however rarely, of channeling true foresight. The power of this prophecy did not lie in its detail, but in its interpretation. Voldemort heard only part of it through Severus Snape, who was eavesdropping and reported back to his master. This incomplete fragment was enough to set Voldemort on a destructive path. He believed the prophecy referred to Harry, the child of James and Lily Potter, born at the end of July. The irony is that Neville Longbottom too fit the description, and the course of history could have been different had Voldemort chosen another target. But Voldemort's decision to mark Harry as his equal fulfilled the prophecy itself. In Dumbledore's words, it was, he said, the mark of the Dark Lord's own choosing. The prophecy became a self-fulfilling truth, and Sybil, without ever realizing it, set in motion the fall of the darkest wizard of all time. The twist lies not only in the content of the prophecy, but in the way Rowling weaves it into the narrative. For 2.5 books, Trelawney is a figure of comic relief. Her classroom a place where Ron makes jokes and Harry struggles to see anything in the swirling smoke. When she first predicts that the Dark Lord's servant will rise again, no one takes it seriously. Only later, when it comes true, with Peter Pettigrew's return, do we begin to suspect that beneath the theatrics lies something genuine, this careful layering of irony and foreshadowing makes the later revelation about her prophecy feel like a punch in the gut. What we dismissed as nonsense now demands our attention. The prophecy also serves as one of the most elegant examples of Rowling's theme of choice versus destiny. If Sybil truly saw the future, then everything was set before Harry was even born. Yet Dumbledore constantly emphasizes that it is not the prophecy alone that defines Harry, but the choices he makes. It is the quality of one's convictions that determines success, not the number of followers, he tells Harry. Harry could have turned bitter under the weight of the prophecy, but he chose to embrace it, to fight not because destiny demanded it, but because love and justice compelled him. In this sense, Trelawney's words were the spark, but the fire belonged to Harry. The irony of Trelawney's importance is highlighted by her complete ignorance of it. She never remembers delivering her true prophecies. To her, the Hog's Head meeting was just another job interview, and she continued teaching her classes in blissful unawareness of how the world had shifted. Even when Dolores Umbridge attempted to sack her in Order of the Phoenix, Sybil's indignation was rooted in her reputation and pride, not in any awareness of her monumental role. She was a woman scorned, not the prophetess who shaped a generation. This obliviousness makes the twist even sharper. The eccentric fraud was, in truth, one of the most consequential figures in the war against Voldemort. What makes the prophecy unforgettable is the ripple effect it created. Because of it, Voldemort attacked the Potters. Because of it, Harry became the boy who lived. Because of it, Snape turned spy for Dumbledore, driven by guilt over Lily's death. Each of these threads traces back to that smoky room in the Hog's Head and the voice of Sybil Trelawney. Without her, the central conflict might never have unfolded. Her words created not only a villain's downfall, but also a hero's rise. She may not have been a warrior, a strategist, or a mentor, but she was the hinge on which the story turned. The twist also reveals Rowling's mastery of character construction. She plants Trelawney as an easy target for mockery, a distraction from the main plot, only to later flip the narrative and show us that we were wrong to dismiss her. This echoes the way many characters underestimated Neville, Luna, or even Harry himself. In the world of Rowling, appearances deceive, and the underestimated often hold the greatest power. Trelawney's arc is not one of personal growth or triumph, but of hidden significance, a reminder that greatness sometimes wears the mask of absurdity. Specific moments further reinforce this duality. When Trelawney predicted that Harry would be betrayed by a servant who had been 12 years in chains, she was laughed off. Yet that servant was Peter Pettigrew, hiding as Ron's pet rat. Similarly, her prediction of Harry's early death seemed melodramatic until we recall that Harry did walk into the Forbidden Forest willing to die at Voldemort's hand. These scattered glimpses of truth embedded in exaggeration strengthen the sense that her power is real, though cloaked in nonsense. The reader is left questioning how much of what she said was true and how much was empty showmanship. Another fascinating aspect of the prophecy is how little agency Trelawney herself had. Unlike Dumbledore, who sought to guide events, or Voldemort, who sought to control them, Sybil was merely a vessel. She had no memory of what she said, no understanding of its impact, and no participation in the choices that followed. Her role was passive, yet essential. This paradox makes her one of the most unusual catalysts in the series, a character who matters profoundly without ever knowing why. In storytelling terms, this twist accomplishes something rare. It recontextualizes earlier scenes without feeling forced. The reader recalls every joke about Trelawney, every eye roll in her classroom, and suddenly feels the weight of irony. We dismissed her just as the characters did, and Rowling catches us in that misjudgment. The result is a moment of narrative satisfaction, a sudden clarity that deepens our appreciation for the intricate weaving of the plot. It also underscores the theme of hidden truths. The prophecy was locked away in the Department of Mysteries, guarded and studied by the Ministry, yet its true meaning remained elusive. Harry only learns the full content when Dumbledore finally shares it with him. Until then, the prophecy is a riddle, half-known and dangerous. Its secrecy and partial revelation mirror the way knowledge in the wizarding world often carries both power and peril. And at the heart of that mystery is Trelawney, a woman few took seriously. By embedding such a crucial revelation within such an unlikely character, Rowling ensured that the reader's expectations were subverted. We expected great prophecies from Dumbledore, wisdom from McGonagall, and cunning from Snape. Instead, the turning point came from Sybil Trelawney, the one least respected. The dramatic irony is exquisite. The fate of Voldemort and Harry was decided not in the grand halls of power, but in a shabby inn, spoken by a woman everyone thought was irrelevant. Perhaps that is why this plot twist resonates so strongly. It is not only the shock of discovery, but the reminder that significance often lies where we least expect it. Trelawney never knew that her prophecy determined the course of history, and yet it did. In a story filled with heroes, villains, and warriors, it was the voice of a trembling, eccentric teacher that whispered the future into being, and that whisper was enough to shape the destiny of them all. Number 20. Draco Malfoy and His Mission. Draco Malfoy's storyline in Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince stands as one of the most effective and surprising narrative twists in J.K. Rowling's saga. For much of the series before the 6th book, Draco is painted in familiar colours: arrogant, sneering, spoiled, and cruel in his adolescent rivalries with Harry Potter, Hermione Granger, and Ron Weasley. His insults about Hermione being a mudblood, his constant attempts to outshine Harry on the Quidditch pitch, and his sycophantic admiration for Professor Snape built an image of Draco as a secondary antagonist, someone present to make school life bitter rather than to pose any genuine danger. Yet Rowling's decision to transform Draco into a central figure in Voldemort's grand designs represented not just a shift in tone, but also a redefinition of who Draco was as a character. Suddenly, readers were forced to see the boy behind the arrogance, and that change gave the story one of its most powerful human moments. From the very start of the 6th book, Rowling carefully seeded clues that Draco's world was shifting. The encounter on the train where Harry spies on Draco in the compartment with other Slytherins set the tone. Draco boasts cryptically about having a task that will raise him in the Dark Lord's favour. While his arrogance remains, it is laced with a desperation that careful readers could sense. Harry himself remarks in frustration that no one believes him when he insists Draco has become a Death Eater. Even Hermione dismisses the idea as far-fetched, pointing out his age. Yet Rowling plants the first seeds of suspicion by highlighting Draco's repeated absences, his secretive trips to the Room of Requirement, and his deteriorating health. It was as though the boy was unraveling in plain sight, but hidden behind shadows too dense for most to notice. The mission itself, once revealed, struck with the force of inevitability and tragedy. Voldemort, who revelled in cruelty, handed Draco the impossible task to murder Albus Dumbledore, the most powerful wizard alive and the only one Voldemort truly feared. This was not a test of Draco's abilities, but a punishment for Lucius Malfoy's failures in the Department of Mysteries, Draco's father stripped of dignity and imprisoned in Azkaban, left his son vulnerable to Voldemort's retribution. By forcing Draco into such a deadly assignment, Voldemort ensured that failure would mean death for Draco and disgrace for his family. In this way, the Dark Lord exposed his sadistic genius. He turned the Malfoys' privilege and pride into shackles, binding the boy to a destiny he could not bear. Rowling made sure to show the toll this mission took on Draco. His physical transformation was impossible to ignore. Harry observes him in Madame Malkin's shop at the beginning of the year, noting his paler-than-usual skin and a sharpened edge to his demeanour. Later, in the bathroom scene where Harry uses Sectum Sempra, Draco's collapse reveals just how fragile he has become. He cries openly, "I can't do this anymore," words that echo the unbearable pressure Voldemort's mission has put on him. This is not the Draco of earlier books smugly mocking Harry at every turn. This is a boy breaking apart under a burden too heavy for his shoulders. The use of the Room of Requirement became symbolic of Draco's double life. To most students, the room was a mystery, appearing only when needed. To Draco, it became both a sanctuary and a prison. It was here that he worked tirelessly to fix the vanishing cabinet, an old piece of furniture that would become the bridge for Death Eaters to invade Hogwarts. Rowling describes him pacing in secrecy, bent over the cabinet with flushed cheeks, a teenager performing an act of war. The irony was haunting. The same boy who once sneered about Quidditch matches was now secretly enabling a siege on the school. His childish rivalries had been replaced with mortal responsibility. and the stakes were as high as life and death. The eventual confrontation atop the astronomy tower brought Draco's arc to its peak. Here stood Dumbledore, weakened and defenseless, after drinking the cursed potion in the cave. Draco, wand trembling in hand, confronted the man he had been ordered to kill. Dumbledore's words cut straight through Draco's bravado. "You are not a killer, Draco." In that moment, the facade of arrogance crumbled completely. Readers saw what Harry had long suspected but could not prove. Draco was no murderer. He had been raised in a world of pure-blood superiority and steeped in the ideology of Voldemort, but when the time came to cross the line into true darkness, he faltered. His hesitation revealed that at his core, Draco was still a child, terrified and clinging to the hope of escape. What made this twist so powerful was the way it redefined our perception of enemies. Draco was no longer simply a foil for Harry. He was now a mirror, reflecting the ways young people are manipulated by forces far beyond their control. Both boys were chosen for roles in the war against Voldemort, but where Harry was guided by love and loyalty, Draco was shackled by fear and coercion. The symmetry is chilling. When Draco lowers his wand on the astronomy tower, it is not just a refusal to kill Dumbledore, it is a refusal to let Voldemort dictate the last remnants of his humanity. The narrative twist also gave new depth to Severus Snape's role. The unbreakable vow, sworn with Narcissa Malfoy and Bellatrix Lestrange, bound Snape to protect Draco and complete the mission if Draco failed. The reader, like Harry, was torn between suspicion and curiosity. Was Snape truly helping Voldemort, or was his allegiance to Dumbledore stronger? When Snape ultimately kills Dumbledore, it fulfills both the vow and Voldemort's command, but it also shields Draco from becoming a murderer. The twist, therefore, created a layered moral ambiguity where the act of murder became, paradoxically, an act of mercy. The tragedy of Draco's mission lies in the fact that his failure was inevitable. He never had the skill, the cruelty, or the conviction to kill Dumbledore, yet his efforts, the poisoned mead, the cursed necklace, were real and dangerous, threatening innocent lives like Katie Bell's. Rowling captured the horror of adolescence corrupted, a boy experimenting with deadly plans, not fully grasping the consequences, yet bound to see them through. In another life, Draco might have remained simply a bully in the corridors of Hogwarts. But Voldemort's manipulation thrust him into the role of assassin, and that irony deepened the emotional resonance of his arc. Readers also saw in Draco's mission the collapse of his certainty. In earlier books, Draco confidently proclaimed the superiority of his family, his bloodline and his alliances. But in Half-Blood Prince, those certainties dissolved. His father's disgrace, his mother's desperation, and his own crumbling resolve exposed the fragility of everything he had been taught to believe. When he stands before Dumbledore, wand quivering, it is as though he is being forced to confront the lie of his upbringing. Dumbledore's calm, almost paternal assurance that Draco is not a killer strips away the ideology and leaves only the frightened boy behind it. The impact of this twist extended far beyond the sixth book. In Deathly Hallows, Draco's wavering loyalty becomes even more apparent. Though still trapped within Voldemort's circle, his reluctance to fully commit shines through in key moments, such as his failure to identify Harry at Malfoy Manor. Readers could trace these choices back to the night on the astronomy tower. Draco's refusal to kill Dumbledore marked the first step away from absolute allegiance to Voldemort, though the path forward remained fraught with danger and compromise. The genius of Rowling's writing is that she allowed readers to feel both anger and sympathy toward Draco. Anger because his actions endangered innocent lives and opened Hogwarts to invasion. Sympathy because he never truly chose this path but was forced into it by a tyrant's cruelty and his family's entanglement. This duality made the twist resonate so deeply. Draco ceased to be a caricature and became instead a portrait of coerced complicity, of a boy thrust into a man's war. Perhaps the most haunting aspect of this twist is that Draco's story could belong to any child in Voldemort's world. He was not uniquely wicked nor uniquely good. He was ordinary, and that ordinariness under the weight of extraordinary evil is what made his mission so moving. Readers were left with the uncomfortable truth that villains are not always villains by choice, and sometimes the enemy is just a boy scared out of his wits, clutching a wand he cannot bring himself to use. In the end, Draco Malfoy's mission in Half-Blood Prince transformed him into one of the most complex characters in the series. What began as a shocking plot twist, Draco ordered to kill Dumbledore, became a lens through which readers could examine themes of coercion, morality, and the blurred lines between victim and perpetrator. Rowling succeeded in reshaping not just how readers saw Draco, but how they understood the entire conflict. By giving the mission to a frightened teenager rather than a hardened killer, she highlighted the true cruelty of Voldemort's reign, his willingness to sacrifice children in his thirst for power. Number 21. The death of Fred Weasley. Fred Weasley's death remains one of the most striking moments in the Harry Potter saga, a reminder that no amount of humour, loyalty, or bravery can shield a character from the brutality of war. Throughout the series, the Weasley family had embodied warmth, comfort, and resilience. From the moment Harry first entered the burrow in Chamber of Secrets, readers felt the safety of a true home. Molly's embrace, Arthur's fascination with Muggle artifacts, and the laughter of the twins created an environment that contrasted the coldness of the Dursleys. That is why Fred's death in the Battle of Hogwarts struck like a lightning bolt. It destroyed the illusion that such goodness could remain untouchable in a world consumed by violence. J.K. Rowling's decision was not random cruelty. It was a deliberate narrative choice to highlight that even the brightest lights can be extinguished, and the cost of victory is measured in loss as much as triumph. Fred's character had always been defined by laughter. Alongside George, he transformed mischief into an art form. From bewitched snowballs pelting Professor Quirrell's turban to the unforgettable fireworks display in Order of the Phoenix, the twins represented joy in a story shadowed by darkness. Their ability to mock fear itself made them beloved not only by Hogwarts students, but also by readers. They sold skiving snack boxes to students desperate for escape from Dolores Umbridge's tyranny, and their joke shop in Diagon Alley, Weasley's Wizard Wheezes, became a beacon of hope. During Voldemort's rise, that Rowling chose to silence one of these voices at the peak of the final battle was an act of narrative precision. The laughter stopped, and in that silence the reader felt the full cruelty of war. The actual moment of Fred's death is brief in the text, yet it carries enormous weight. Rowling writes, "And Fred's eyes stared without seeing, the ghost of his last laugh still etched upon his face." The description is haunting because it captures the cruel irony of his demise. Fred dies in the middle of a joke, speaking to Percy about finally cracking a smile. The joy that had defined his life was the last expression he ever gave. This detail transforms his death into a moment that feels both tragically fitting and unbearably unfair. It is not just that Fred died. It is that he died while embodying his essence, finding humor even in chaos. That contrast between lightheartedness and sudden devastation makes the loss unforgettable. Fred's death also resonates so deeply because of his bond with George. Throughout the series, the twins had been inseparable. Their sentences blended into one another, their pranks unfolded like choreographed performances, and even their identities seemed fused. When Harry notes in Goblet of Fire that Fred and George's names were often said in one breath, it underlines that the brothers were rarely seen apart. This unity made them a symbol of wholeness. The moment that bond was broken, readers felt an almost physical pain. To imagine George without Fred is to imagine one half of a song silenced forever. Rowling. forced readers to confront not only death, but also the shattering of perfect harmony. The grief of George is left understated in the novel, yet its power lingers. He loses not just a brother, but a mirror of himself. Rowling allows us to glimpse the devastation through fleeting details, leaving space for the reader to imagine the unbearable. In Deathly Hallows, after the battle, George is simply stunned and white-faced, a description that communicates a void words cannot fill. Fans later speculated endlessly about George's life without Fred, wondering whether his laughter ever returned. Rowling confirmed in interviews that George eventually married Angelina Johnson and named his son Fred, but she admitted that George was never quite the same. This illustrates that Fred's death was not a dramatic sacrifice for narrative convenience. It was a wound that continued to bleed into the aftermath. What makes Fred's death particularly effective as a plot twist is its unpredictability. Readers entered the Battle of Hogwarts prepared to lose characters. After all, Rowling had foreshadowed the immense cost of war. But few expected the twin who symbolized comic relief to be the casualty. Many anticipated the deaths of more traditionally serious figures, Lupin, Tonks, or even one of the main trio. While those losses also occurred, Fred's death carried an element of shock because his role had always been to lift spirit. By striking down a character so intertwined with joy, Rowling emphasized that war does not discriminate. The pain is sharper when it cuts through laughter. The Weasley family's reaction reinforces this devastation. Molly and Arthur had raised their children with warmth and humor despite limited wealth. To see their family fractured by war brings the horror into sharp focus. Molly's fierce duel with Bellatrix Lestrange later in the battle can be read as an outpouring of maternal rage, not just for Ginny, whom Bellatrix targeted, but also for Fred, whose loss shattered her heart. The Weasleys had represented the perfect refuge for Harry, but the war's cruelty stripped away their completeness. This moment reminded readers that even the most loving families cannot shield themselves from tragedy when darkness rises. Fred's death also served a symbolic purpose in illustrating the fragility of innocence. The twins had resisted the corruption of the world by laughing at it, mocking its authority, and refusing to let fear dictate their choices. Their joke shop thrived precisely because people needed to laugh when despair was overwhelming. By killing Fred, Rowling shattered the illusion that innocence, no matter how clever or resilient, can survive untouched. In doing so, she underscored the stakes of the battle. If Voldemort's tyranny continued, no corner of joy or love would remain safe. Fred's absence became the price of ensuring such cruelty would not spread further. Comparisons can also be drawn with other deaths in the series, but Fred's stands out for its timing and emotional impact. Dumbledore's death in Half-Blood Prince was monumental, but it came with preparation and symbolism. Sirius's death in Order of the Phoenix shocked readers, yet it was thematically foreshadowed by Harry's growing independence. Fred's death, by contrast, was sudden, almost senseless, and without noble build-up. It felt brutally realistic, echoing how lives in war are cut short not in grand sacrifice but in the blink of an eye. That realism is what makes it resonate so painfully. The scene also reflects Rowling's insistence on grounding her fantasy in human truth. She once explained in interviews that she wanted children who grew up with Harry to understand that death is an inevitable part of life. By killing Fred, she reminded readers that even beloved characters are not safe from the randomness of war. The grief of fans mirrored the grief of the Weasleys, and that shared mourning created a bridge between fiction and reality. Readers learned through this loss that hope comes not from avoiding death, but from enduring it and choosing to fight on. Fred's death additionally reshaped the arc of Percy Weasley. For much of the series, Percy had been estranged from his family, siding with the Ministry and dismissing his relatives as misguided. His reconciliation during the battle was one of the emotional highlights of Deathly Hallows. Yet the cruel timing of Fred's death, occurring just as Percy rejoined his siblings, added another layer of tragedy. Percy was robbed of the chance to fully heal his relationship with Fred, leaving guilt entwined with his grief. This narrative choice emphasized the cost of delayed reconciliation, a sobering reminder that pride and stubbornness can steal precious time. The image of Fred's lifeless body also haunts Harry himself. Having been embraced by the Weasleys as a surrogate family, Harry's bond with them magnifies his own guilt. He carries the weight of knowing that his presence in their lives exposed them to danger. When he sees Fred lying still, Harry is forced once again to confront the reality that his fight against Voldemort comes at a cost paid by those he loves most. This deepens the emotional stakes of his eventual decision to sacrifice himself. Fred's death is part of the tapestry of loss that pushes Harry toward selflessness. Another layer to consider is how Fred's death shaped the reader's experience of the final victory. When Voldemort fell, the triumph was bittersweet. Yes, good triumphed over evil, but the laughter that once echoed through the halls of Hogwarts would never sound the same. This balance between joy and sorrow made the ending feel more authentic. Rowling resisted the temptation of a perfect, unblemished victory, instead reminding her audience that true victories come with scars. Fred's absence lingered like a shadow across the celebration, anchoring the triumph in emotional truth. The long-term impact of Fred's death on fandom has been extraordinary. Readers have written countless tributes, fanfictions, and essays about the void left in George's life and the Weasley family as a whole. Many return to the line describing Fred's final expression, seeing in it the cruel paradox of a character defined by humour, whose last act was silenced in tragedy. In remembering Fred, fans confront the lesson Rowling embedded in his fate. War consumes indiscriminately, and the cost of peace is always steep. His death, far from being meaningless, became one of the most powerful reminders of why the fight mattered. In the end, Fred Weasley's death was a masterstroke of storytelling. It shocked, it devastated, and it illuminated the harsh reality of Rowling's world. By removing a character who symbolized joy, Rowling gave weight to the victory at Hogwarts and left readers with a scar that mirrored those carried by her characters. Fred's absence was not just a plot device, it was the emotional truth of war, the reminder that love is precious, precisely because it is fragile, and that even the brightest laughter can be silenced when darkness comes too close. Number 20. 2. Grindelwald and Dumbledore. The Duel of the Century. The name of Gellert Grindelwald echoed like a whisper of dread throughout the wizarding world long before Harry Potter was even born. He was a figure shrouded in myth, his reign of terror remembered as one of the darkest chapters in magical history, second only to Voldemort's rise decades later. But when Harry first heard of him in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, it seemed more like an old legend, an ominous name attached to relics of the past. It was not until the truth of Grindelwald's relationship with Albus Dumbledore emerged that the story transformed from distant myth into a devastating revelation. For Harry, it was a shocking reminder that even the people he most trusted, those who stood as pillars of strength, were not immune to human weakness. The duel between Dumbledore and Grindelwald was spoken of in reverent tones, almost mythologized by wizards who lived long after it happened. It was described as the greatest wizarding duel of all time, one that shook not only the foundations of the magical world, but also the hearts of those who believed in the unbreakable bond of friendship. In the earlier books, Dumbledore seemed untouchable, a wise and almost flawless guide for Harry. The revelation that he had once been bound by youthful dreams and misguided ideals, alongside Grindelwald, shattered that illusion. Rowling's narrative made it clear that Dumbledore's fallibility was central to understanding his greatness. He was not born a hero, he became one only after confronting his greatest failure. The backstory of Grindelwald and Dumbledore was unveiled through Rita Skeeter's scandalous biography, The Life and Lies of Albus Dumbledore. Though dripping with bias and sensationalism, it contained fragments of truth. Harry read in disbelief about Dumbledore's summer friendship with the young Grindelwald in Godric's Hollow when both were barely out of school. They had shared dreams of reshaping the wizarding world, with slogans like, "For the greater good," guiding their vision. This detail transformed Dumbledore from a remote figure into a young man who had once faltered, whose brilliance was nearly corrupted by the seduction of power. It was not a tale of pure evil versus pure good, but a story of two friends standing on the edge of ambition, only to be pulled apart by tragedy. The tragedy, of course, was personal as well as political. The duel that cost the life of Ariana Dumbledore, Albus's fragile younger sister, was the breaking point. In Deathly Hallows, Aberforth's bitter words cut through Harry's illusions. "You don't know him. You never did. You never knew what that letter meant." The mention of Ariana's death, tangled within a three-way duel between Albus, Aberforth, and Grindelwald, cast a shadow over Dumbledore's choices. This was no abstract moral failing. It was an intimate disaster that shaped his future path. The grief and guilt from that day stayed with him, pushing him away from Grindelwald forever. Years later, their confrontation became inevitable. Grindelwald rose to power in continental Europe, amassing followers and spreading fear, much like Voldemort would later do. He seized control of Nurmengard and bent entire nations to his will, brandishing the Elder Wand as a symbol of his dominance. Dumbledore, meanwhile, remained in Britain, building his reputation as a brilliant scholar and defender of justice, yet avoiding a confrontation he knew must come. The wizarding world asked why he delayed so long, but the truth was heartbreakingly simple. Dumbledore dreaded facing the man who had once been his closest friend. The eventual duel was not merely a political necessity, it was a reckoning with the ghosts of his youth. The duel itself was described only in whispers, for Rowling never painted the scene in detail, but its impact was monumental. It lasted for hours, with spells of unprecedented power colliding in showers of light. The sheer scale of their magic forced wizards across Europe to take notice. In the aftermath, Grindelwald was defeated and imprisoned in his own fortress, Nurmengard, left to rot with the dreams that had once consumed him. Dumbledore, though victorious, never celebrated the triumph. His guilt never faded because he knew the victory was born of failure, the failure of a friendship, the failure of a dream gone wrong, the failure to protect his own sister. For Harry, learning this history was deeply unsettling. Dumbledore, the man he trusted more than anyone, had once been tempted by the same hunger for dominance that defined Grindelwald. It called into question everything Harry thought he knew about the line between good and evil, but Dumbledore's honesty, shown in his posthumous letters and memories, revealed that he had confronted this weakness. He admitted that power was his greatest temptation, and that was why he refused the position of Minister for Magic. He had learned, through pain, that no one could be trusted with unlimited control, not even himself. This made his later choices all the more powerful because they were not the choices of a saint, but of a man who had fought and conquered his own darkness. The resonance of this duel went beyond Harry's personal disillusionment. It became a symbol for the wizarding world that even the most brilliant alliances could collapse when ambition overshadowed morality. The friendship between Grindelwald and Dumbledore was rooted in shared intellect and vision, but it was poisoned by arrogance. In the end, they represented two diverging paths. Grindelwald clung to the idea of the greater good as justification for tyranny, while Dumbledore chose humility, recognizing that no end could ever justify such means. The duel was not only magical, but ideological, a clash between two interpretations of destiny. Rowling heightened the emotional weight of this revelation by weaving it directly into Harry's quest for the Deathly Hallows. Grindelwald's obsession with the Hallows mirrored Voldemort's obsession with immortality, but unlike Voldemort, Grindelwald had once inspired love and admiration in Dumbledore, making the betrayal more cutting. Harry's confrontation with this story mirrored his own temptation to seek the Hallows instead of the Horcruxes. Dumbledore's past acted as a cautionary tale. Even the greatest wizard could stumble when blinded by desire. This gave Harry the strength to resist making the same mistake. The legend of the duel was also a reminder that history is not made by faceless forces but by choices, often painfully personal ones. Wizards remembered the clash as a titanic battle of good versus evil, but beneath the myth was the heartbreak of two friends who once dreamed together. It showed Harry and the readers that history books could never capture the agony behind those choices. For Dumbledore, it was never just about defeating a dark wizard. It was about confronting the boy he once was and proving that he had changed. This revelation deepened the thematic core of the series, the fallibility of heroes. Dumbledore was not the perfect mentor Harry once believed. He was a man shaped by loss, burdened by secrets and marked by mistakes. Yet it was precisely this imperfection that made him inspiring. Heroes in Rowling's world were not defined by their purity, but by their ability to learn from failure and to rise above temptation. The duel with Grindelwald, remembered as the duel of the century, was less about spectacle and more about redemption. Harry's own journey reflected this lesson. When he faced Voldemort in the Forbidden Forest, he did so not with lust for power, but with self-sacrifice. He had absorbed the truth of Dumbledore's past and recognized that true greatness lay not in conquering others, but in conquering oneself. This connection between Dumbledore's history and Harry's destiny was deliberate, tying together the arcs of mentor and student in a way that gave their relationship a deeper, almost tragic resonance. It is striking that Rowling never described the duel in vivid detail. By leaving it shrouded in mystery, she allowed readers to focus on its consequences rather than its mechanics. The battle was remembered not for the spells cast, but for the symbol it became, the ultimate clash of ideals between two wizards who had once dreamed of ruling together. In this way, the absence of detail became its own kind of artistry, letting the imagination fill the gaps while the heart grappled with the meaning. The echoes of the duel reached even Voldemort. In Deathly Hallows, when he confronted the imprisoned Grindelwald, the old man refused to betray Dumbledore's secret. Even in defeat, Grindelwald acknowledged the bond that had once existed between them, a bond that Voldemort could neither comprehend nor destroy. This final defiance gave the duel a lingering power, proving that even the darkest wizard could not entirely sever the ties of loyalty forged in youth. For Harry, it was another reminder that love and connection were stronger than fear and domination. Thus the legend of Dumbledore and Grindelwald ceased to be a distant backdrop. It became a mirror of the choices that defined the series, a living symbol of how friendships can turn into rivalries and how ambition can lead to ruin. It was not just the duel of the century, it was the duel that explained why Dumbledore chose to guide Harry the way he did, why he emphasized love over power, and why his greatest triumphs were born out of his deepest regrets. And in understanding that, Harry finally saw his mentor not as an untouchable figure, but as a man, flawed, wounded, but ultimately truly great. Number 23, Cho Chang's betrayal. Under the snowy corridors of Hogwarts in the Order of the Phoenix, the friendship between Harry Potter and Cho Chang was not merely a teenage crush, but a fragile thread holding two grief-stricken characters together. Harry had lost Cedric Diggory to Voldemort's return, and Cho had lost her boyfriend in the same tragic event. Their tentative steps toward each other gave readers a rare sense of tenderness in a book otherwise dominated by rebellion, anger, and the suffocating presence of Dolores Umbridge. Yet, woven into this budding connection was a shadow. The betrayal linked to Cho, or more specifically to her friend Marietta Edgecombe, revealed how even in the closest circles of Hogwarts, loyalty could crack under fear and pressure. This was not a betrayal of love alone. It was a narrative twist that pierced the heart of Harry's trust in those he believed were on his side. The story of Dumbledore's army began as a secret act of courage. Hermione Granger suggested the clandestine group in the Hog's Head, and the students swore their loyalty by writing their names on a piece of parchment enchanted with protective spells. This decision created a sense of unity among Harry, Ron, Hermione, Neville, Ginny, Luna, Cho, and many others. They met in the room of requirement, practicing defensive spells like the Patronus charm, which Harry himself taught, despite his own lingering self-doubt. For Cho, these meetings were more than lessons. They were a place where she could be close to Harry, a boy she admired not only for his bravery, but for the fact that he had been the last person to see Cedric alive. The fragile romance between them added emotional weight to the secret gatherings. When Cho's kiss with Harry under the mistletoe took place, it seemed like a sign that amidst the rising darkness, love could bloom. Yet the hope this moment carried was short-lived. The critical turning point arrived when Marietta Edgecombe revealed the location of the room of requirement to Umbridge. Marietta, Cho's friend from Ravenclaw, was terrified of her mother losing her job at the Ministry of Magic, and in her panic, she chose self-preservation over loyalty. With this act, the fragile illusion of safety around Dumbledore's army collapsed. Umbridge stormed the meeting with her inquisitorial squad, shattering the trust. That had bound the group together. In the narrative, this betrayal was devastating not only for Harry, but for every student who had dared to resist tyranny. The very idea that someone inside their ranks had exposed them underscored a grim truth. Even in noble causes, fear can erode conviction. Cho, caught in the middle because of her association with Marietta, became the face of this betrayal in Harry's mind. Rowling made this twist especially cruel by tying it to Harry's first experience with romantic attachment. Readers could feel his disappointment sharpen when Cho defended Marietta afterward. She insisted her friend had been under immense pressure, that her family ties to the ministry had left her no choice. Harry, however, could not reconcile betrayal with excuses. In his eyes, the safety of the group and the trust of its members was sacred. "She's a sneak," Hermione exclaimed in righteous fury, reminding everyone that her spell had marked Marietta with purple pustules spelling the word sneak across her face. For Harry, this branding was symbolic. It was not simply Marietta's face that was scarred, but his faith in Cho. Trust, once broken, carried wounds deeper than any magical affliction. This sudden collapse of their fragile relationship revealed the brilliance of Rowling's storytelling. Harry's disappointment with Cho was not only about a broken romance, but about the crushing realization that even allies can falter. For readers who expected Harry's love life to provide relief from the darker themes of the series, this moment was a cold reminder that the world he inhabited was merciless. Unlike fairy tales, where love shields characters from harm, Rowling showed that love itself could fracture under pressure. The betrayal added realism to the story, making Harry's journey less about comfort and more about enduring heartbreak, while the shadow of Voldemort loomed ever larger. The betrayal also carried symbolic weight. The Room of Requirement had been a sanctuary, a magical place that reflected the unity and hope of the students. When Marietta exposed it, the room lost its aura of invincibility. Safety at Hogwarts, already fragile under Umbridge's reign, was stripped away completely. The message was clear. Nowhere was truly safe, not even among friends. For Harry, this was a lesson he could not ignore. Trust was a rare and fragile commodity, and those who bore the title of friend or ally could falter in moments of fear. In the greater arc of the series, this lesson prepared him for betrayals on a larger scale, such as Snape's duplicity and the treacherous actions of others in the wizarding world. Cho's role in this twist remains one of the most hotly debated elements of the Order of the Phoenix. Some readers sympathized with her, recognizing that she had been caught in a painful position between her feelings for Harry and her loyalty to her friend. Others viewed her defense of Marietta as evidence of weakness, contrasting her with stronger characters like Hermione or Ginny, who displayed unwavering commitment to the cause. Rowling deliberately blurred the lines, showing that teenagers at Hogwarts were not immune to the complexities of loyalty and morality. Cho was not an enemy, but neither was she the steadfast partner Harry might have wished for. Her inability to fully choose Harry over Marietta created a rupture that could not be mended. In terms of character development, this moment hardened Harry. After losing his godfather Sirius Black later in the book, the earlier betrayal by Cho and Marietta seemed like foreshadowing of his constant struggle with loss. Rowling made sure that by the end of the Order of the Phoenix, Harry stood more isolated than ever. His anger, grief, and sense of abandonment were sharpened by the series of betrayals that marked his 5th year. Cho's failed relationship with him was not merely a subplot, it was part of a larger theme of disillusionment. This theme echoed throughout the book as Harry realized that the adults he once trusted, from Dumbledore to the Ministry of Magic, were fallible and sometimes disastrously so. The scene also highlighted the contrast between Cho and other female characters in Harry's life. Hermione, despite her flaws, stood firm in her principles, engineering the group with cunning foresight. Ginny, though still in the background at this stage, demonstrated bravery and independence, traits that would later bring her closer to Harry. Against these examples, Cho appeared fragile, indecisive, and vulnerable to outside pressures. Rowling used this contrast to deepen the narrative, making Harry's eventual relationship with Ginny in later books feel like a natural progression toward a partner who shared his resilience. Another detail often overlooked is how Rowling wove Cedric's memory into the betrayal. Cho's grief over Cedric's death was one of the bonds that initially drew her and Harry together. Yet it also made her fragile and conflicted. Defending Marietta might have been Cho's way of clinging to any semblance of loyalty, even if misplaced. The tragedy was that her inability to let go of conflicting loyalties mirrored her inability to fully heal from Cedric's death. This layered portrayal made her betrayal more tragic than malicious, underscoring the way trauma can distort judgment. For readers, the betrayal was a jarring reminder of adolescence in all its painful contradictions. Rowling captured the reality that teenagers often make choices driven by fear, pressure, and conflicting loyalties. Cho's actions, though disappointing, were believable. They forced Harry to confront the uncomfortable truth that not everyone in the fight against Voldemort could be trusted to stay strong. This realism strengthened the book's dramatic impact. The story was not about perfect heroes and villains, but about flawed individuals navigating impossible situations. The literary function of this betrayal was also to intensify the atmosphere of distrust. With Umbridge tightening her grip, the Ministry spreading propaganda, and Voldemort rising in power, the students' betrayal of each other mirrored the wider world. Just as the wizarding government betrayed its own citizens by refusing to acknowledge Voldemort's return, Marietta betrayed her peers, and Cho, by defending her, betrayed Harry's trust. Rowling crafted a microcosm of the larger conflict within the walls of Hogwarts, making the betrayal not just a romantic twist, but a reflection of the overarching war. Rowling's choice to write Harry's disappointment with such intensity cemented this moment as a turning point. After Cho, Harry learned to guard his emotions more carefully. His relationship with Ginny later in the series was built not on fragile first love, but on mutual strength and respect. The betrayal in the Order of the Phoenix was necessary for Harry to mature. Without that heartbreak, his character arc would have lacked the depth required for the trials that awaited him. Betrayal, pain, and loss were his teachers, shaping him into the leader he needed to become. Even years after the book's release, readers still discuss whether Cho truly betrayed Harry. Technically, it was Marietta's action, but Cho's defense of her friend sealed the perception of betrayal. The nuance of this moment demonstrates Rowling's skill in weaving moral ambiguity into her work. Heroes were not always right, and those close to them could stumble in ways that hurt deeply. This ambiguity is what made the series resonate with older readers as much as with younger ones. Life, like the story of Cho and Harry, rarely offers easy answers. In the end, the betrayal linked to Cho Chang was one of the most effective narrative twists in the series. It transformed a teenage romance into a lesson about trust, loyalty, and the fragility of human bonds under pressure. For Harry, it was a wound that stung deeply, and for readers, it was a reminder that even in the magical world of Hogwarts, the pain of betrayal is as sharp as in real life. Rowling ensured that this subplot did not distract from the central conflict, but rather enriched it, making the fifth book not only about the rise of Voldemort, but about the very human cost of standing against darkness. Number 24. Arthur Weasley and the Snake Attack. Arthur Weasley's near-fatal encounter with Nagini in Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix was not simply another dark moment in a series already filled with danger. It was a carefully crafted narrative twist that reshaped the reader's understanding of Harry's inner world. The attack itself, set in the bowels of the Ministry of Magic, was terrifying, but the true shock came from the perspective through which it was revealed. Readers were pulled out of the familiar vantage point of Harry's eyes and instead hurled into the skin of a serpent, moving with predatory intent, sensing the victim through scent and vibration rather than sight. In that chilling passage, Rowling blurred the boundary between Harry Potter, the hero we trusted, and Voldemort, the villain who had cursed him from infancy. This narrative choice created an eerie duality that lingered long after Arthur's survival was assured, raising an uncomfortable but vital question. Was Harry merely seeing Voldemort's actions, or was something inside him becoming more like the Dark Lord himself? The writing of that night in Grimmauld Place strikes with raw immediacy. Harry is described thrashing in his sleep, overwhelmed by alien sensations. Rowling writes, "He was moving through a dream. The corridor he walked was long and dimly lit, and he moved steadily, soundlessly, on long-scaled body, his forked tongue flickering. In this moment, Harry is no longer Harry. He is Nagini. He is the predator." When the snake strikes at Arthur Weasley, the horror is doubled. Not only is Arthur being mauled, but Harry is experiencing the violent act as if his own body carried it out. For a protagonist defined by his resistance to darkness, this vision is shattering. The emotional tremor comes less from Arthur's wounds and more from Harry's fear that he has crossed an invisible boundary and become a vessel for Voldemort's malice. Rowling had hinted before at the connection between Harry and Voldemort. From the very first book, the boy's ability to speak Parseltongue marked him as different, an ability associated only with Salazar Slytherin and the Dark Lord. In Chamber of Secrets, Dumbledore reassured Harry that it was his choices, not his abilities, that defined him. But reassurance is fragile, and in Order of the Phoenix, the reassurance begins to crack. By allowing Harry to see through the snake's eyes, Rowling escalates the connection from symbolic to visceral. No longer is it about speaking a forbidden language, it is about inhabiting the body of Voldemort's creature and tasting the joy of violence. The scene thus becomes a narrative pivot, suggesting that the hero may not only be linked to evil, but may contain it within himself. The placement of this scene within the broader arc of the fifth book is deliberate. Order of the Phoenix is a story of mistrust, isolation, and fear of corruption. Harry is already alienated from the Ministry, doubted by the public, and often at odds with his friends. The attack on Arthur Weasley functions as the turning point where his inner alienation reaches its peak. Afterward, Harry is no longer sure of his own identity. He fears being used by Voldemort as a weapon against those he loves. In fact, he even tries to withdraw from Ron and Hermione, believing that his presence itself endangers them. The attack is less about Arthur's blood on the floor than about the psychological scar it leaves on Harry, a deep uncertainty about where he ends and Voldemort begins. What makes this twist so successful is that it operates on two levels. On the surface, It heightens the suspense by endangering Arthur Weasley, one of the most beloved characters in the series. The Weasleys represent warmth, family, and a home Harry never had. To harm Arthur is to threaten the very symbol of safety that sustains Harry, but on a deeper level, the attack places Harry in the morally precarious position of identifying with the attacker rather than the victim. Readers are forced into complicity, sharing Harry's horror as he embodies Nagini. This layering of external peril with internal crisis makes the scene one of the most haunting in the entire saga. Dumbledore's reaction adds weight to the twist. When Harry recounts the vision, Dumbledore's demeanor changes drastically. He avoids eye contact, he becomes withdrawn, and he sends Harry away with a coldness that wounds as deeply as the vision itself. This behavior suggests that even Dumbledore, the great source of wisdom, harbors fears about the nature of Harry's connection to Voldemort. Rowling writes, Dumbledore did not look up. His face was gaunt and tired, and Harry felt a spasm of resentment, thinking that Dumbledore was avoiding his eyes. The lack of reassurance here amplifies the tension. If the wisest wizard alive is worried that Harry might be more vessel than boy, then the possibility cannot be dismissed lightly. The narrative brilliance lies in Rowling's ability to transform a common trope into a psychological exploration. Dream visions are frequent in literature, but in this case the dream is indistinguishable from possession. It serves as both plot device and metaphor. Plot-wise, it alerts the Order to Arthur's peril in time to save him. Metaphorically, it represents Harry's internal battle against the darkness seeded within him since infancy. The scar on his forehead, once seen as a mark of survival, becomes a conduit for corruption. In that moment of predatory attack, the scar is no longer a badge of honor but a channel through which Voldemort can infiltrate Harry's soul. Arthur's character plays a crucial role in deepening the impact. As a gentle, curious man who values Muggle trinkets over political ambition, Arthur symbolizes innocence and kindness in a corrupt world. His victimization underscores the cruelty of Voldemort, but it also underlines the tragedy of Harry's vision. To feel himself inflicting pain on Arthur Weasley, who has always welcomed him with open arms, is a particular torment. The guilt that Harry carries afterward magnifies the power of the twist. It is not just the act of violence, but the betrayal of a surrogate father figure, even if only in vision, that haunts him. Another layer of tension arises from the secrecy surrounding the incident. Harry fears telling others, worried they will see him as tainted or dangerous. This silence festers, fueling his alienation. It is only when he admits his fears to Sirius and later to his friends that some measure of support returns, but by then the damage is done. Readers experience the suffocating weight of Harry's self-doubt, and the question lingers. If he can see through the snake's eyes, what stops Voldemort from controlling him entirely? This dread is not theoretical. Later in the book, Voldemort does exploit this link, luring Harry to the Ministry through visions of Sirius. The attack on Arthur thus foreshadows the climax, where Harry's inability to distinguish between his own emotions and Voldemort's manipulation leads to catastrophic loss. Rowling bolsters the moment with imagery that emphasizes duality. Harry describes the sensation of his body being long and scaled, moving with sinuous grace. The description is tactile, almost intoxicating, as though the predator's body offers a power Harry cannot claim in his own skin. The seduction of strength and the thrill of control add complexity to the horror. It is not just revulsion that Harry feels, but also an unwanted exhilaration. This subtle undercurrent raises profound questions. Does evil tempt not only through fear, but also through the allure of power? In embodying the snake, Harry tastes both sides. And the experience leaves him shaken. The scene also redefines the meaning of prophecy within the series. Up until this point, Harry is portrayed as the chosen one by fate, marked by prophecy to confront Voldemort. But the vision through Nagini suggests that the prophecy may have darker implications. Perhaps he is not merely chosen to defeat Voldemort, but shaped to mirror him, bound so tightly that their identities blur. The attack on Arthur becomes evidence that destiny is not straightforward. The possibility that the hero and the villain might be two sides of the same coin adds depth to the narrative and keeps readers questioning what victory might ultimately mean. Readers' emotional response to the attack is telling. Many report feeling unsettled not by Arthur's injury but by Harry's role in it. The idea that the hero could be a conduit for evil unsettles the foundations of trust that had been carefully built over 4 books. For children and adults alike, the realization that good and evil are not cleanly divided but entangled in one person is both frightening and enlightening. Rowling refuses to let her readers rest in simple categories, instead pushing them to grapple with ambiguity. The scene achieves what all great twists do. It changes how every subsequent event is interpreted. Arthur's survival allows the narrative to shift from tragedy to reflection. He spends the rest of the book recovering, his resilience a quiet counterpoint to Harry's turmoil. Yet the scar the event leaves on Harry is invisible but lasting. He can never again see himself as wholly separate from Voldemort. This fuels his later decision to learn occlumency, to shut Voldemort out of his mind, though his failure in those lessons reinforces the theme of vulnerability. The twist is not resolved neatly. It reverberates through the series until the final revelation about Harry being a Horcrux, confirming that his fears were not unfounded. The artistry of this twist lies in its economy. In a single night with a single vision, Rowling plants seeds that will blossom across 2 more books. The attack confirms the peril of Harry's connection, foreshadows the manipulation at the Department of Mysteries, and sets the stage for the ultimate revelation of his role in Voldemort's downfall. More importantly, it humanizes the struggle. By showing Harry's terror at his own capacity for darkness, the narrative taps into a universal fear that the line between ourselves and what we despise may be thinner than we imagine. Even upon rereading, the scene retains its power. Knowing that Harry is a Horcrux adds new resonance to his experience as Nagini. It is no longer merely a shared vision, but the manifestation of a soul that has been fractured and unwillingly shared since infancy. The attack on Arthur Weasley is not just a plot device, but a revelation of the series' central truth. The battle between good and evil is not external but internal, fought within the self as much as against an enemy. By plunging Harry into the body of the serpent, Rowling forces readers to confront that truth head-on, making the moment unforgettable and the twist profoundly effective. Number 25, Lily Potter and her protection. Lily Potter's sacrifice stands as one of the most powerful twists in J.K. Rowling's saga, a revelation that unfolded gradually and transformed the way readers understood the story's foundations. At first glance, it appeared that Voldemort had simply failed in his attempt to murder an infant, leaving Harry with nothing more than a lightning-shaped scar. But as the narrative expanded, it became clear that Lily's last act of love carried a weight that not even the Dark Lord's most powerful curses could overcome. The moment when Harry learned that his mother's death had not been in vain but was instead the anchor for his survival redefined the meaning of protection, reshaping both the character's destiny and the series' deeper themes. The tragedy of Godric's Hollow was first presented in fragments. Readers were told that James Potter died trying to hold off Voldemort, that Lily followed moments later, and that Harry somehow survived a curse that had killed countless others. Dumbledore's explanation in Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone was cryptic. Your mother died to save you. If there is one thing Voldemort cannot understand, it is love. At the time, these words seemed like a simple comfort, but they foreshadowed a far greater truth. It was not just maternal devotion in a sentimental sense, it was a magical bond, a living shield forged by Lily's choice to die rather than stand aside. This twist becomes most evident in the first book's climax, when Professor Quirrell attempts to seize the Philosopher's Stone. The image of Harry, small and vulnerable, watching Quirrell's flesh blister and burn at his touch is unforgettable. Rowling revealed through Dumbledore's later words that it was Lily's sacrifice that made Harry's skin untouchable to one who carried Voldemort's soul. This detail confirmed that the very foundation of the boy's life and the Dark Lord's failure rested not on prophecy or chance, but on the enduring force of a mother's love. What appeared at first to be an unexplained miracle was, in fact, the cornerstone of the entire saga. Lily's decision is even more striking when contrasted with the cruelty of Voldemort himself. Tom Riddle was conceived under a love potion incapable of feeling genuine affection. For such a man, the idea that selfless love could wield greater power than the killing curse was absurd. His command to Lily in Godric's Hollow was chilling. "Stand aside, you silly girl, stand aside now." Those words, preserved in memory, encapsulate his arrogance. Voldemort could not imagine that refusal and sacrifice would create a protective magic older and stronger than any spell in his arsenal. His failure to comprehend this cost him his body and began his downfall. The importance of Lily's sacrifice is reinforced by Harry's own actions throughout the series. Time and again he embodies the same willingness to put himself in harm's way for those he loves. When he dives into the Chamber of Secrets to save Ginny Weasley, when he faces a basilisk with only Godric Gryffindor's sword, the echo of Lily's protection resonates. Dumbledore later tells Harry in Order of the Phoenix that the connection to his mother's love meant he carried a power the Dark Lord knows not. This statement is not merely symbolic, it foreshadows the moment when Harry himself repeats Lily's choice, walking into the Forbidden Forest to die so that others might live. What makes Lily's sacrifice such a brilliant twist is how Rowling gradually layers its meaning. The early books suggest that Harry's survival was luck or destiny, but as the series unfolds, it becomes clear that it was neither. Instead, it was a deliberate act of love that Voldemort's power could not touch. This reframing shifts the entire understanding of Harry's place in the wizarding world. He is not just the boy who lived. He is the boy who lived because his mother chose to die. That difference reorients the moral foundation of the story, reminding readers that heroism often begins with quiet, unseen choices. Another striking example occurs in Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, when Voldemort regains his body. In the graveyard, Harry faces the killing curse once more. What saves him from instant death during the duel is not luck, but the echo of Lily's sacrifice embedded in the twin cores of the wands. The connection between Harry and Voldemort is drawn back to that single night in Godric's Hollow. Even Voldemort's attempt to undo the protection through dark rituals fails to erase the bond. Lily's love remains a stubborn thorn in his designs, a constant reminder that power built on fear cannot erase the mark of sacrifice. The emotional resonance of this twist is heightened when Harry finally learns the full truth in Deathly Hallows. In the forest, as he prepares to meet Voldemort face to face, he recalls his mother's voice and the countless times her love shielded him. The Resurrection Stone allows him to walk alongside her, James, Sirius, and Lupin, but it is Lily's presence that anchors him. Her sacrifice had once saved his life, and now it guides him to offer the same protection to others. This cycle of love and self-sacrifice closes the circle begun in Godric's Hollow, proving that Lily's act was not only a plot device, but the essence of the story's moral center. Rowling underscores the significance of Lily's protection through contrasts with other characters. Consider Narcissa Malfoy in the final battle. When she lies to Voldemort, claiming Harry is dead, she does so to save her son. This parallel highlights how parental love can override allegiance to dark powers. Yet unlike Lily, Narcissa's act is self-preserving and immediate, not sacrificial. The difference underscores why Lily's choice created an enduring shield, while Narcissa's merely changed the course of a battle. Both moments reveal the limits of Voldemort's vision. He never truly grasped that love motivates actions beyond self-interest. One of the most poignant revelations comes when Harry himself explains the nature of his protection to Voldemort. In the final confrontation, he declares, "You won't be killing anyone else tonight. You won't be able to kill any of them ever again, don't you get it? I was ready to die to stop you from hurting these people." This line mirrors Lily's earlier sacrifice. By consciously repeating her choice, Harry extends that shield over everyone fighting in Hogwarts. The ultimate irony is that Voldemort, who believed himself invincible, is undone by a pattern of protection born from what he despised most, human love. The brilliance of this twist lies not only in its emotional depth, but in how it reframes the mechanics of magic. Readers are taught early on that spells, potions, and incantations define power, yet Lily's act requires no wand movement, no Latin incantation, no complex ritual. It is instinctive, raw, and utterly human. By embedding such magic into the narrative, Rowling elevates ordinary love into a force that rivals and surpasses the darkest sorcery. It is a narrative sleight of hand that transforms sentiment into the most formidable weapon in the story. The impact of this revelation extends to Severus Snape as well. His lifelong devotion to Lily makes him both ally and antagonist, but ultimately, it is her memory that defines his choices. When Dumbledore tells Snape, "He has her eyes," it serves as a reminder that Lily's sacrifice lives on not only in Harry's protection, but in the conscience of others. Snape's complex allegiance, torn between Voldemort and Dumbledore, is anchored in the same act of love that defeated the Dark Lord once before. Lily's influence thus reverberates across allies and enemies alike, shaping the moral compass of the series. By the time readers grasp the full extent of Lily's protection, the story of Harry Potter has become a meditation on the endurance of love in the face of violence. The fact that the saga begins with this twist and circles back to it in its conclusion makes it one of the most elegant plot devices in modern fantasy. It transforms a tale of wizards and curses into something universally relatable. Everyone understands the concept of a parent's sacrifice, and by embedding it into the very fabric of magical lore, Rowling ensures that the series resonates on a deeper emotional level. Even the scar on Harry's forehead, the most iconic symbol of the series, is a product of Lily's act. It serves as both a reminder of Voldemort's failure and a sign of her love. Each time Harry touches it, whether in pain or reflection, the narrative circles back to the truth revealed in the first book. He survived because someone loved him enough to die for him. That detail, deceptively simple, carries the weight of destiny. The lightning bolt is not a mark of chance, but of deliberate sacrifice. Ultimately, the revelation of Lily Potter's protection is more than just a clever twist. It is the heartbeat of the entire series. It shapes Harry's identity, undermines Voldemort's ambitions, and reframes the reader's understanding of what constitutes real power. As Dumbledore tells Harry in Philosopher's Stone, to have been loved so deeply, even though the person who loved us is gone, will give us some protection forever. That single line, repeated across the series in different forms, reminds us that the story of Harry Potter began not with a curse, but with a mother's love. And in that unexpected truth lies the most successful and moving twist of all, at number 26, Dumbledore's Army. When Harry, Hermione, and Ron first gathered their friends inside the Room of Requirement, the idea seemed reckless, almost juvenile. They were 16-year-olds breaking rules in a castle where Dolores Umbridge, backed by the Ministry itself, ruled with cruelty and suspicion. Yet behind the whispers and the nervous laughter of those first gatherings was a seed of rebellion. The act of naming themselves Dumbledore's Army was a bold declaration. It mocked the Ministry's paranoia and simultaneously transformed the fragile group into something far more serious than an after-school club. The turning point lay not in the secrecy, but in the transformation of ordinary students into future defenders of Hogwarts. Harry's role as teacher was at first reluctant. He had never seen himself as a leader of peers, but necessity forced him into that place. Hermione's insistence that he take charge framed the venture as a responsibility rather than a game. The classes began with clumsy wand movements and uncertain incantations, yet the students leaned forward with eagerness. They were not merely children repeating spells, they were preparing to survive. Luna Lovegood, Neville Longbottom, Ginny Weasley, names that once carried an air of fragility or anonymity, suddenly began to embody courage. Rowling describes this gathering of unlikely heroes with warmth. The knowledge that they had learned something, that they could defend themselves, made the room seem even more welcoming. That sentence already foreshadowed the later significance of their training. Neville is the clearest example of this transformation. When he first lifted his wand in those clandestine lessons, his movements were awkward, his voice hesitant. Few would have predicted that this same boy would stand against Bellatrix Lestrange in the final battle. His growth was not spontaneous, but carefully built within the safety of Dumbledore's army. The spell practice, the encouragement of friends, and Harry's steady belief all worked as chisels, shaping his bravery. The group that began as a refugee for insecure students eventually gave Neville the strength to draw the sword of Gryffindor from the sorting hat. That act, killing Nagini, was not just the final blow to Voldemort's power. It was the culmination of everything seeded in those hidden lessons. Ginny Weasley also embodied this shift. Often seen as the youngest sibling, overshadowed by her brothers and by Harry himself, she asserted herself in the DA as fiercely independent. Her bat bogey hex became infamous within the group, her confidence undeniable. She was not a sidekick, but a fighter in her own right. The training gave her a stage to prove that she belonged among the strongest. Rowling reinforces this when she shows Ginny at the Battle of the Department of Mysteries, holding her ground beside the others. What started in the Room of Requirement spilled into the wider conflict, marking the DA as more than an academic curiosity. It was preparation for war. The Ministry's fear of the group ironically confirmed its power. When Umbridge discovered the existence of Dumbledore's army, she was furious not merely because students had defied her, but because they had created a symbol. The very name suggested a loyalty stronger than her authority. Harry was dragged before the inquisitorial squad, Dumbledore claimed responsibility, and the headmaster vanished from the school. That moment revealed how a group of teenagers could unsettle the foundations of power. Their gatherings had grown dangerous because they inspired hope. What had begun as a lesson in practical defense had become an underground movement of resistance. The Room of Requirement itself became a character in this transformation. It responded to their needs, sheltering them from Umbridge's surveillance and offering a space for possibility. It provided cushions, books and dummies, but also security and belonging. When the DA reconvened years later, during the height of Voldemort's reign, the same room offered sanctuary once more. It was as if the castle itself recognized the importance of these students. The chamber became the womb of rebellion, protecting its children until they were ready to emerge into battle. The most striking shift occurred during the final book, when Harry, Ron, and Hermione returned to Hogwarts to find Neville leading the remnants of the DA in open defiance. The timid boy who once struggled with spells had transformed into a commander, scarred and battered, but unbroken. He had turned the Room of Requirement into a fortress, housing fugitives and planning strikes against the Carrows. This continuation showed that the DA had never been merely about learning spells. It was about forging leadership and solidarity. In Neville's hands, it became the very resistance movement that Harry had unknowingly started years earlier. The climactic battle of Hogwarts crystallized the narrative twist. Students who had once whispered incantations in secret now stood shoulder to shoulder against Death Eaters. Cho Chang, Padma Patil, Seamus Finnegan, faces once lost in the crowd, emerged with wands raised in determination. The final confrontation was not only Harry's fight, it was theirs as well. Rowling paints the picture vividly. The defenders of Hogwarts were outnumbered, but they were united by something stronger than fear, This unity had been born in the room of requirement, where laughter and mistakes had slowly evolved into discipline and courage.